The house was quiet. Too quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but of anticipation. The kind that waits in hallways, behind closed doors, behind heavy drapes, where even the tick of a clock feels like accusation. Lena moved through it as if she belonged to no one but herself. She was not small. She was not delicate. She was a woman who had spent her life building walls taller than the fear of loneliness, and filling them with her own wealth, her own standards, her own love. The one love she would never allow anyone to diminish. Her own. Her figure was full, unapologetic, commanding, and she carried it like an armor. Lena had learned early that some men were only interested in self-interest. Richness, fame, power, she had all of it, but she demanded something few could give: authenticity. And that was how she met Rich. He was everything she did not need. Everything she thought she could ignore. Poor in patience, poor in restraint, but handsome enough to be forgiven by anyone blind enough to hope. When he came into her life, she gave him everything. Not love, necessarily, but opportunity. A home. Connections. Money. Status. A chance to be more than the man he was. And he took it, but never graciously. He drank when no one was watching. Drank to become someone who could stand beside her without feeling inferior. But the more he drank, the more Lena saw him unravel, piece by piece. She tried to understand. She tried to forgive. But some things were unforgivable. 3 hours. That was how long she had watched him from the window from her second-floor study. He was speaking to a shadowed figure, a woman whose face Lena could barely discern. Something in the curve of her neck, the tilt of her head, whispered secrets Lena did not want to hear. When he returned, he was careful. Too careful. Had to stay late at the office, he said, voice calm. A friend dropped me along the road. Lena's eyes narrowed. A friend? You were in the garden. I watched you for 3 hours. He hesitated, blinked, then smiled like a man performing a role he had rehearsed 1,000 times. I was thinking. Just thinking. Her hand struck him sharply across the back. He cried. A grown man, trembling, sobbing, not from pain, not from apology, but from chaos inside him he could not name. That night, Lena understood something new. He was emotionally unmade. Months later, Lena discovered a truth that chilled her to the bone. Rich had fathered a child with the maid. She had suspected it, yes. But when she saw the baby, the weight of betrayal pressed on her chest like a stone. Rich fell to his knees, pleading. It was a mistake. I swear. It meant nothing. The maid's voice was even, cold. I can abort it. We can move on. But Lena, ever the mother, ever the protector, saw through them both. No, she said quietly. You leave the baby. I will see that it lives. I will protect it. You do not raise it. He took the child. She nurtured him. He loved him. And she named him Edward. Edward would never know otherwise. To him, Lena was not the woman who took in another's child. She was mother. The house was quiet in that strange way quiet can feel loud. Not peaceful silence. The kind that presses against the skin, heavy, waiting. Lena had fallen asleep earlier than usual. The day had worn her down. Her thoughts had circled and circled, and there was nothing left in her except exhaustion. Outside the door, the knocking began. Not gentle. Not patient. Violent. Deliberate. Like someone wanted to wake the dead. Boom. 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 The whole hallway shook. Richard knew how to use sound like a weapon. He had a spare key. He had always had a spare key. But tonight, he wanted her to hear him break the peace. He wanted her awake. He wanted her unsettled. He wanted control. Lena rose, her body still heavy from sleep, her steps slow. She opened the door, not even asking why, not even questioning, because some wounds become familiar. Richard stumbled in, drunk, his movements sloppy but his face alert, aware, calculating through the blur. Edward, only 6 years old, heard the noise too. His room sat just across the hall. He came out quietly, small bare feet touching cold tile. He sat at the dining table in the dark, knees pulled to his chest, watching from the shadow where no one would think to look. The small blue nightlight tinted everything in a soft, ghostly color. Richard entered the bedroom. Lena had already laid back down, hoping maybe he would sleep and tomorrow would be better. He stood over her. She felt water splash across her face. Sharp, cold, shocking. It shot into her nose and her breathing seized. She gasped awake, coughing, choking, grasping for air. And he laughed. A laugh full of mockery and delight, the laughter of a man who enjoyed her breaking. "You were scared, right?" he said, grinning. "You should have seen your face." Lena sat up, trembling not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that she no longer knew the man she had loved. She looked at him. Really looked. His smile was not the smile she once held like a warm memory. His eyes were not eyes she once trusted. His voice was not the voice that once said "I love you." Something inside him had died long ago, and she had not noticed in time. He paced, laughing again, his words spilling loose and poisonous. "I can't stand you, Lena. I can't. You irritate me. He exhaled sharply, disgusted. "You're suffocating." Her heart slowed. Her breath stilled. He continued. "You don't know this, right? I drink myself stupid just to touch you. I have to be numb to even be near you." She froze. The world did not break loudly. It broke quiet, like glass cracking under cold water. She sat at the edge of the mattress, her face buried in her palms. Her body shook, not weak, not powerless, but overwhelmed by the betrayal she now finally understood. Then something rose inside her. Something old. Something strong. Her home. Her life. Her identity. She lifted her head slowly. "This is my house," she said softly. Richard blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Her voice steadied. "This is my house. Get out." He stared at her, half amused, half insulted. "No," he said. "I'm not leaving." She stood. He stepped closer. Their voices tangled, anger, heartbreak, years of unspoken wounds erupting all at once. Then the slap. Her hand struck his cheek with a sound sharp enough to cut the silence. Not rage. Not cruelty. Just truth. His face changed. The shaking began, his hands first, then his shoulders, then his breath. He sank to the stairway, curling into himself, muttering, rocking, trembling, a man undone by his own unraveling mind. She stepped back, reaching for her phone. His foot shot out. She fell. Hard. Her body hit the stairs, her scream echoing through the dark. "Mom!" Edward whispered from the dining room, but no one heard him. Richard moved fast. He pinned her, pressing down on her shoulders, her ribs, her throat, pushing her toward the staircase edge. She fought for air. Her voice rasped. "Ed." And then, she fell. Down, down, down. The sound of her body hitting the floor below was not loud. It was final. Edward ran to her, tiny hands shaking her face. "Mama? Mama? Mommy?" Her mouth moved but no voice came. Her breath came heavy, broken. She tried to lift her arm. "Cole, thanks." Edward reached for her, and the shadow of his father appeared above them. With a stick, he raised it, and Edward stepped in front of her. The stick froze. Richard blinked. Everything in him changed in a breath. Oh God," she fell, he said suddenly, voice cracking into fake panic. "We need help. We need to save her." The maid arrived, breathless, rehearsed. Edward tried to stay beside Lena, but they pulled him away, soft lies wrapped in warm hands. "She'll be okay, sweetheart. Go rest. Go sleep. She'll be fine." They carried Lena to the bathroom instead of the hospital. Running water. Hands forcing. A head held down. A struggle that did not last as long as a life deserved. Silence. And the world lost its gentlest light. Edward felt it before the door opened. Some silences are final. When they announced her death, they called it an accident. A slip. Tragedy. Why? The burial was beautiful. The grief was not. Edward did not break. He hollowed. The earth was still fresh on Lena's grave when the house changed hands. The curtains that once held soft morning light were torn down. The frames with her smile were quietly removed. The air no longer smelled of lavender and warm bread but of perfume that was too strong and laughter that pretended to be joy. Richard and the maid, her name was Marina, moved quickly. They sold the house. They sold the cars. They sold every piece of Lena's life that could be turned into something useful. They didn't sell out of poverty. They sold out of convenience. Money bought distance. Money buried memory. Edward watched it all. Not crying, not speaking. Just watching. His silence was not peaceful. It was heavy. Children at school called him names. Ghost boy. Weirdo. Crazy eyes. But Edward did not fight. He did not defend. He simply stared through them like he could see something they couldn't. Teachers suggested therapy. Marina agreed out loud but rolled her eyes in private. Richard avoided conversations entirely. They believed time would fix him. Time did not fix anything. The kitchen was quiet that night. Richard had fallen asleep on the couch, one arm hanging off the edge like he had forgotten he had a body. Marina stood over the stove, stirring something in a bowl. Her movements were slow, careful, almost gentle. But her eyes were sharp, cold, alert. She fed Edward dinner with a soft smile. "Eat, sweetheart," she said. "You need your strength." He didn't answer. He just ate because eating was something you did to stay alive. Minutes later, his eyelids grew heavy. His vision blurred. The room swayed. Sleep didn't come like exhaustion. It came like a curtain being pulled shut. Marina waited until he was completely still. Then she went to his room, lifted his small body, wrapped him in a thin sheet. He felt weightless in her arms, like something already gone. She opened the back door, stepped into the night and walked. The road outside the city was narrow, lined with dry grass and telephone wires humming softly above. She laid him on the side of the road like someone placing trash beside a dumpster. No goodbye, no kiss, no hesitation, just absence. Then she turned, got into the car and drove away. The taillights disappeared into the dark. When Edward woke, the sun was low and harsh, burning his face. His body felt heavy, his mind far away, like it hadn't returned with him. He sat with his knees pulled in, his head resting on them, breathing quietly the way one breathes after losing too much. The world around him was still. Then, a shadow crossed over him. A man stood there, tall, dressed in black that didn't need to announce itself to be seen. His presence wasn't just large. It was felt. His face carried 25 scars, but not one of them was accidental. Edward didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He simply looked. His eyes traced each scar with the quiet, precise attention of someone who had watched suffering closely and remembered every shape of it. Then, without thinking, 25, he whispered. The man's expression shifted, just slightly, like a flame flickering in a room with no wind. His voice was low. "I am Vito." Edward said nothing. Vito didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask where the boy came from. He didn't ask who left him. Men like Vito didn't need questions to understand tragedy. He turned and walked away. Pause. Then footsteps returned, not his. 3 men approached. Not rough. Not loud. Efficient. They lifted Edward gently, as if lifting something breakable that had been broken enough already. A man stood there, tall, dressed in black that didn't need to announce itself to be seen. His presence wasn't just large. It was felt. His face carried 25 scars, but not one of them was accidental. Edward didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He simply looked. His eyes traced each scar with the quiet, precise attention of someone who had watched suffering closely and remembered every shape of it. Then, without thinking, 25, he whispered. The man's expression shifted, just slightly, like a flame flickering in a room with no wind. His voice was low. "I am Vito." Edward said nothing. Vito didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask where the boy came from. He didn't ask who left him. Men like Vito didn't need questions to understand tragedy. He turned and walked away. Pause. Then footsteps returned, not his. 3 men approached. Not rough. Not loud. Efficient. They lifted Edward gently, as if lifting something breakable that had been broken enough already. Vito did not speak after asking Edward how he knew the scars counted 25. He didn't have to. He simply lifted one finger. A gesture. A command. The room did not move, but the world around it did. 2 of his men slipped out through the heavy door with the fluid discipline of men who did not need words to act. They reviewed the street footage from the compound's outer cameras. The same cameras hidden behind vines and chipped plaster. They saw her, Marina, carried the sleeping boy, placed him on the roadside, stood and watched him for a long moment. Not hesitating, not guilty, just done. He drove away. The men followed the footage trail through intersections, traffic cameras, store security recordings, quietly, precisely. They traced the license plates, the house, the occupants, the history. Vito did not rush them. Vito never rushed anything. By the time he sat in the room with Edward, the information already sat in his hands. He simply hadn't decided what it was yet. That was Vito. Nothing was done quickly. Everything was done right. Edward was given a warm bath, clean clothes, a room with soft bedding, but he did not eat. He did not speak. He did not sleep. He just existed, still, quiet, alert. Then footsteps approached. Slow. Measured. Vito entered. He did not ask how Edward felt. He did not ask what Edward remembered. He just sat. Edward's eyes drifted to the scars again. His hand lifted, small, trembling, and touched Vito's cheek. Something softened in Vito's posture. Not vulnerability. Not pity. Recognition. How? Vito asked quietly. Did you know there were 25? Edward did not answer with words. Silence answered for him. Behind the door someone listened. They're young, dressed in black like she was born to wear shadows. When Lyra stumbled into the room after eavesdropping, Vito caught her before her face hit the floor. It was not tenderness. It was precision. He placed her gently upright. Her hair fell over her shoulder in a dark wave. Her eyes flicked to Edward, sharp, curious, assessing. This was not shyness. This was recognition. She spoke softly but clearly. So this is the boy. Vito nodded once. He stays. That was all he said. And that was all that needed to be said. Lyra crossed the room and sat beside Edward, not touching, not soothing, simply present. A presence that did not demand anything. Edward's breathing eased by a fraction. Vito leaned back into the chair. No theatrics. No dramatic sigh. No tremor in the voice. He spoke the way a man speaks when the past no longer hurts, but is remembered with the clarity of a blade. His words were measured, precise. Cling. You want to know the scars? You should. They raised me more than any parent ever did. His gaze did not soften. One scar above my left cheekbone. My father hit me when I tried to protect my mother. I learned love means nothing without power. 2. The line across my jaw. He called me a bastard and cracked my head against the railing. I learned blood is not family. 3 and 4. The twin cuts across my eyebrow. I stabbed him first. He woke up. He carved my face for daring. I learned mercy is something monsters use to find your soft places. He paused only to draw smoke, not emotion. The air thickened. 5. Scar under my chin. My mother carried me through rain while her hands shook. I learned even love breaks under weight. 6. Behind my ear. A bridge. Hunger. I learned the world does not care if you live or die. Lyra's breath slowed. Edward did not blink. 7. 12. Fights. Streets. Bread with glass in it. Knives. A child screaming. A woman bleeding. A man hunted across alleys. Vengeance that did not satisfy. His voice stayed cold. Pain is practice. And I practiced. He tapped the cigarette out. 19. When he found me again. He did not bleed long. I learned the past only stops when you face it standing. Finally, he touched the smallest scar. Barely a mark. 25. Razor wire. Pulling Lyra back from the edge. I learned love does not leave. Silence. Not heavy. Not emotional. Absolute. Then Vito spoke the most important sentence of his life. I did not become cruel because I wanted to. I became cruel because softness gets people killed. He stood. Here we do not ask where you came from. We ask who you will become. He looked directly at Edward. And you, boy, have already survived something most men never do. The scars on Vito's face had finished speaking, but their echoes lingered in the quiet room like footsteps in an empty church. Lyra's shoulders trembled first. The small sound of her grief was almost soundless, and yet it filled the space as if someone had opened a window into winter. He could not hold it. She let the grief come like a wave she had been avoiding for years. Sudden, salt-heavy, unavoidable. Betrayal uncoiled from her ribs. Mothers who traded safety for appearances, neighbors who looked the other way, hands that were supposed to protect that only ever pushed. She cried into Vito's shoulder, into the stubble at the corner of his jaw, and for the first time since she was a child someone let her. Vito stiffened, cold and precise, and then, with a motion reserved for things that must not be broken, he folded his hand over the back of her head. He hated to see her cry. He hated the softness that had saved her once and left the world raw. Edward watched them from the doorway, the parlor's dim light catching the edges of his face. Young, luminous, carved by absence. Family. The word rolled in Edward's head like a stone in a glass bowl. did not feel simple. It did not feel permanent. It meant duty and fire and the strange miracle of being chosen. Lyra's tears embroidered the meaning in his mind. He understood then, family was more than blood. It was a promise you gave and kept even when the rest of the world abandoned you. Vito turned his head toward the boy with an almost formal curiosity. How did you know? He asked, not probing, only cataloging, an archivist of the broken and the brave. Edward said nothing. He was not a liar. He could not explain what time had taught him. How a child watches the angles of grown men's faces and learns where the light falls wrong. Lyra, soothed by the shoulder that had become her refuge, whispered the truth back for him. How she had seen in the way Vito walked, how the stories in the scars made sense. It was a small conspiracy of survivors. They grew, Lyra and Edward, not as lovers at first but as kin forged in the same furnace. They were partners in the truest sense. She hunted the monsters who hid behind the sanctity of family. He backed her with the quiet precision of someone who had learned to keep score without speaking. They called themselves hunters. Sometimes they called themselves children's ghosts turned to guardians. Vito, who had given them shelter, gave them more. Permission, roof, training. He taught them how to move without leaving tracks, how to read a map of human weaknesses, how to listen to the sound of a locked door and know who it belonged to. Their work was surgical. They moved like whispers, collected names and evidence, took pictures in the dark, placed listening devices, arranged rescues that left no trace of themselves, until the night the trace found them. Dan was not a man who tolerated uncertainty. He was a don with a habit of settling scores the way other men paid insurance. Relentless, exacting. When reports reached him, reports of a team that had been unmaking his allies quietly, he did not assume coincidence. He assumed interference. He called Vito and dressed the request in polite language that meant nothing. Bring me the hunters who go after my men. Clean job. No questions. The tone was business. The threat was a clean blade behind the handshake. Vito did not pretend loyalty to Dan. He respected the map Dan controlled and he knew the breadth of what Dan could do. But when his men scrolled the footage that night, the faces they saw were not anonymous mercenaries. They were Edward and Lyra, children who had grown into deliberate predators of predators. Vito understood immediately what the Don had done. He had baited a trap and expected the hunters to walk into it. Dan was ruthless and incapable of mercy. He did not negotiate in shades. He offered an ultimatum: lay off my people or be prepared for reprisal. Vito's reply was quiet. He told Edward and Lyra to hand him the list of their targets. He told them to watch their backs. He said nothing of his plan. Everything he did next he did with the cold geometry of a man who had spent a life learning that speed without thought is a child's instinct. Proof arrived. One of Lyra's investigations turned up a house that reeked of rot and the kind of shame that keeps its own doors locked. The old man in the story had been a father who slept with his daughter in the name of some demented devotion. The daughter had been a child once. Now she was a woman who saw and named what had been wrong. Lyra sent the file to Vito, sure it was not their case. Vito looked and then started the engine of connection in his mind. The address matched a plate. The plate matched the car that, minutes before, had been traced, Marina's car. The woman who had abandoned Edward on the roadside, Marina, had ties deeper in that neighborhood than anyone assumed. Vito murmured a number. 15 years dead, he said softly, and Edward felt the name of a history he could not yet read. There was no time for meditation. A report pinged into the compound. Men were closing in. 25 minutes. The city tightened like a fist. They took positions. The compound became a mouth of moving shadows. Men and women Vito trusted like lungs spread throughout the perimeter. The children, those without parents, those housed in the safe rooms that Lyra had kept, were moved to hidden places. For Vito the priority was absolute. Protect what little family they had built. Then the lions came. Dan's men, masked, precise, brutal, cut through the night like rusted knives. The first clash was a cadence of bone and breath. The air filled with the metallic perfume of fear. Edward and Lyra moved as one. Lyra with blades that sang like glass, Edward with a gun that found angles. Surgical violence, necessary and terrifying. Vito's men fell and rose, some taken to the floor. His property burned in places, but his order did not collapse. When Dan himself stepped into the fight, there was a soft, involuntary recognition. Man against man. Empire against empire. Lyra found Dan that night. She moved quickly, a blind and final judgment. She struck again and again with the rage of a child who had become a blade. Dan fell under her hands. He did not die immediately, but he bled like every man who had chosen cruelty for sport. When it ended, it was ugly and clean and decisive. Vito lost men. He lost stone and blood, and the taste of it sat in his teeth. But Dan's networks frayed. The crates of influence that had belonged to Dan slowly, bewilderingly, folded to the new geometry of Vito's will. From that night forward, Vito was no longer merely a rumor. He was the name spoken aloud in rooms that had once been secure for men like Dan. He earned fear the way some inherited a title, with fire and a willingness to pay the price. He inherited Dan's connections the way a surgeon inherits a legacy, after the removal of the tumor. In the weeks that followed, the compound did what empires do when they change hands. They rebranded. The children Lyra and Edward had rescued were placed under official protection. Evidence, compiled and strategic, was handed to sympathetic officers Vito had quietly courted. Cases were opened, arrests made. Vito used his swelling influence to wedge himself into the space between law and the street, and where government once ignored, it now listened, partly because Vito made them and partly because the public saw the victims climbing out of the dark into the light. There was a day soon after when they went to find Richard. They did not expect drama. They expected a small, resentful man, perhaps hiding in some cheap rental, nursing his cowardice and drinking his resentments into ruin. What they found was even worse and more honest than that. Blood glazed the floor like dark varnish. A woman stood over Richard's broken body, a chair leg, with splintered and blunt, clutched in her hands. Her face was a mask of something like triumph and something like horror. She had struck him until it was done, until the hate that had lived in her hands could not find air. Vito's men moved first, gently, Edward and Lyra behind them, rigid with the sight. The woman was arrested. She told her story in a voice that trembled, then steadied years of humiliation, a life made small by a man who called names and spat love like poison. The police listened, recorded, and then had to reconcile the law with the rawness of a human wound. Richard was dead on the floor, and the explanation, brutal and finally public, sat in the files. Edward stood there, the scene burning into him in a way he had not expected. He had been raised to hate the father who had failed him, yet seeing the body, the finality, a rusted sorrow dawned. A part of him, small and traitorous, wished for something else. An apology, a chance to change the past with a word. The thought hurt like salt. He swallowed it down and let the grief fold into him like a dark flower. Vito watched him with an old and knowing patience. He put a hand, calloused, warm, over Edward's shoulder. "It is done," he said. "Not to erase but to anchor. It is over." The empire that had been nothing but rust and ferns on the roadside had become a place where names were reclaimed and children were not fodder for the worst in men. Vito used his new reach, legal, illegal where needed, to funnel resources and truth into courtroom corridors. Lyra and Edward stood before cameras and judges, not as vigilantes but as witnesses. The government, pressured and pragmatic, could not ignore what Vito's men had opened. A series of cases that exposed rot in places once thought sacrosanct. What they built was not a paradise. It was not a repentance. It was a machine that would not allow the same cruelty to breathe in the same spaces. It was a promise given in blood and law. Those children would be seen, and those who hurt them would be hunted with patience and pitiless clarity. Inside the compound, by a window that watched the rusted gates, Edward let himself feel the dangerous, complicated thing that had grown in him. Love for a family bound by choice, not by blood. Lyra's hand found his. Vito stood across the room, unmoved, an empire of scars and quiet oaths. Outside, the city continued, unaware of the seams being stitched tight. Inside, new scars kept being earned, some invisible, some precise, but none would be wasted. They were maps now, each line a promise. Remember, fight, protect. The sun stood low that morning, half drowned in fog, bleeding a copper light over the cemetery. The earth was damp from the night's rain, heavy old rain that smelled of endings and confessions. A long stretch of black cars lined the dirt road. The air was still, thick enough to taste grief if you breathed too deep. Edward stood in front of the grave with both hands clenched into silence. His eyes didn't shine anymore. They burned. The marble headstone before him was white and simple, carved with a single name. Lena Arden. She lived with truth even when love lied. It had taken months to find where her remains had been buried, unmarked, forgotten, tucked in a side plot under someone else's name. Vito had called in favors, the kind that cost no less than loyalty. He'd said nothing when Edward told him what he wanted. He simply nodded once, then said, "She deserves her name back." Now she had it. The graveyard was quiet except for the distant hum of the city below the hill. Indifferent, busy, unaware. Edward stood still, tall now, carved by pain into something sharper than a man. His black coat shifted with the wind, his face unreadable. But beneath the armor, the child still breathed. The boy who once hid in the parlor, who saw his mother fall down the stairs, who watched her die for a love that was never love at all. Lyra stood beside him in silence. The veil she wore fluttered lightly against her cheek. She held a single white rose in her hand, a symbol she said she'd keep for every woman who was silenced by cruelty. Her other hand found Edward's wrist, grounding him. Her eyes, wet but fierce, studied the stone. Vito stood a few steps back, his frame quiet and grave. The scars on his face caught the dull light, a map of lessons carved into flesh. He had buried too many, and yet this one, this woman he had never met, felt different. Perhaps because her death had shaped the boy who became Edward. Perhaps because, in some cruel design, every broken child reminded him of his own mother's face. Edward stepped forward, holding a small wooden box. Inside were three things: a silver bracelet Lena used to wear, recovered from her jewelry safe. A page torn from the diary she kept, her handwriting fierce and looping. "I am not broken. I am choosing to begin again even if no one lets me." And a handful of soil from the first home she ever built. A luxury house she sold long ago, the one she had dreamed of living in with someone who would never come.